Welcome everyone, and thanks for coming to our event. This is Black Against the Wall, Black Life and Death, a virtual protest against state-sponsored violence during COVID-19 and beyond. This event is being put on by Black Lives Matter Women's in BLM B-town. And the presenters today are all going to be members of the BLM B-town Core Council. The purpose of the conversation today is to talk about how we got where we are, what the state of Black life and death is right now in the United States, and some visions of a new future. A lot of folks have made the comment, we don't want to go back to normal. People are asking, when do we get back to normal? When do we get back to normal? A lot of Black folks, we don't want to go back to normal. So what does the new world that we're looking for look like? What are we imagining? So this is the conversation that we're going to be having today. Thank you for joining us. The presenters today are going to be, like I said, BLM B-town Core Council members. Are going to be BLM B-town Core Council members. Me, I'm Martin Law. We're also going to be hearing from Jacinda Townsend, Jada B, Renee Rashid, Lauren McAllister, and Amrita Chakrabarti Myers. We're going to start the program today with a short reading by Jacinda Townsend. It's an excerpt from her novel, James Loves Ruth. And she's going to be reading a couple-minute excerpt from that book now. Jacinda?
It had been 6 hours since the police officer had shot her father 4 times, and the short pop, 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 nimble as the treble clef of a sonata, was on instant replay in her mind. She'd been lying outside in the grass, watching the sky for low-altitude flights from San Francisco. And when she heard the report of the gun, she flopped wildly over to her stomach, thinking the shots were coming from across the privacy fence from Mrs. C's cactus garden. The moment in which she hesitated, the moment it took her to figure out the shots were coming from somewhere within her very own house, was the moment her mind began learning to revise itself. Should she cower out of sight, she wondered? Should she save herself? And then she thought of her father, her one living parent, and in the next second she was running, screaming, "Dad, Dad, Dad," because she already knew. And for a long time afterwards, she thinks she knew because she held her father just that closely in her consciousness. But years later in college, she'd take psychology for and learn about distance and perception. And she'd wonder if she'd heard on the wind a disturbance of sound wave as Bob Bradley scaled the fence to get to her bedroom. And her father argued with him, and the neighbors saw this entire sequence of events and called the police. Had she smelled on the air the fine microscopic particles of gunpowder as the sheriff took his high-range rifle, got out of his cop car, and aimed at the darker man's chest? By the time she ran through the back door, through the kitchen, through the living room, and out the front door, her father was stooped in the driveway. He wore his favorite shirt, the white one with intersecting purple, green, and gray stripes, the shirt she liked to think of as graphing paper. She could see the circles of blood breaking more and more of the 90-degree angles the stripes made, spreading across his shoulder like the sample stain in a whiskey commercial. From behind her father, she could see the policeman still pointing his gun. She could see Bob standing with his hands straight up in the air, his hazel eyes turned almost gray in the sunshine, tears oozing out of them. From behind, she saw her father's arm bent at the elbow where he was clutching some part of his own interior, and she saw the defeated sag in the legs of the brown pants he wore on the day he spoke to her sixth grade class about accounting as a career, and the day he told her and Wendy to go outside and rake the leaves in the front yard, and the day he picked her brother up from his 16th and last day at Riley Children's Hospital. She saw her father fall over. She heard his head smack against the black top of the driveway he'd just refilled with Henry's. She saw the blood fly out of his mouth, little droplets of her father's heart turned to beads of airborne liquid. Time slowed then, in a way she'd always be ashamed of. And it wasn't until she heard the crackling voice on the cop's car radio that she screamed. She ran to her father in big gulpy steps, but then there came 3 cops ricocheting against her chest before she could even touch him. They wrestled her to the hot asphalt alongside her father, and someone clicked open a pair of handcuffs. Someone sat on the back of her legs and wrenched her shoulders backwards, and even as the pain shooting through her spinal column blocked out almost everything else, she heard the second metallic click of the handcuffs they were fastening on her father. His face was a foot away from hers. "Dad," she said, or thought she said. "Dad, I won't let them hurt you anymore." But then they were dragging her to the cop car, dragging her before she could even stand. So the first her knees and then the toes of her tennis shoes skidded against the pavement, the sidewalk, the street. She tried to kick, and when she couldn't, the scream came. And then they were shoving her in the back seat of the cop car that smelled of corn chips and stale vomit. Female officer telling her, "Better watch that little head, nigger." And then she saw from the back seat, through the windshield, her sister Wendy, who'd been upstairs working on her Kim 2 model, shoved into the cop car ahead of her. She saw 2 cops handcuffing Bob Bradley while a third took his statement into a mini recorder. She saw a 4th officer unwinding yellow tape from a roll, and nowhere did she see an ambulance. "Did one of you motherfuckers call 911? She asked the cop driving her. But the cop just told her to watch her mouth. She asked him 5 more times, and never would he answer her. And then they were off, far across town in the police station, which she'd never seen. She and Wendy were hauled out of their respective cars in some sort of synchronized fashion and taken to 2 different interrogation rooms, and she wasn't uncuffed until she vomited from pain, and they were held for hours upon unkind hours. There was no clock in her room, but she saw the passage of time because she became hungry, and it felt inappropriate to say so. She was thirsty and thought she might die if she didn't get water. She asked for it. The policeman chuckled and flashed her a cold stare. She had to pee. She told him he was a son of a bitch and she would piss right there in his chair. He told her to be his guest. She doubted she'd get a change of clothes, and she didn't want to give him the satisfaction. She held it. A fat, bald detective with the mustache of a pervert entered, walked across the polished yellow concrete floor in eager taps, and asked her about her encounters with Bob Bradley. She spilled all because she was 16 years old and unsure of what else to do. She entertained the superstitious hope that each detail might, like a Catholic novena, right some physical wrong that had been done to her father. Thinking the detective then owed her something, she asked whether her father was still alive, was told, "That's not our concern here." Thank you.
Thanks, Jacinda. That's a reading from Jacinda Townsend's novel, James Loves Ruth. And in many ways sets a stage for a lot of what we're going to be discussing today. The first thing that we want to, so the next thing we want to do is have just a brief moment of remembrance. Part of the exigence for what we're doing today is the ongoing attention and response to the lynching of Black folks by police around the nation. And so we want to take just a moment to remember some of those who have recently lost their lives to state-sponsored violence. And so Renee is going to lead us in a brief moment of remembrance.
Liberationists, abolitionists, freedom fighters, beloveds, today we are holding space. We are holding space for those who have become ancestors before their time, for those who have been persecuted by the state, for those that have died in the hands and the knees of white supremacy. We come here tired, exhausted, but renewed in the spirit of our community, of our resilience, of our shared purpose to be in this war for the liberation of our freedom. We honor these new ancestors by holding and calling their names and holding space in between breaths for those whose names we do not even know to call. Drayshawn Reed, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, George Floyd. Let us send them into love and light as we pull down their strength to prepare us for the journey ahead and be fortified in the light of our ancestors. As we continue participating in this project of liberation. Ashe.
So as we start our conversation today, we're doing it with, with those people and all those others who died in the fight for liberation in mind. And so I think the way we're going to start the conversation today is to start by talking about how the current struggle is embedded within a wider history of struggle and done both for our own sakes, for the future, but also in the name of all those who, as Renee said, became ancestors before their time. So I think maybe we'll start by going to Amrita. Amrita, do you want to give us a brief contextualizing statement of the last 400 years of, of struggle? Again, we can't talk about everything today, but what we're trying to do is just have a little bit of a conversation, and then after that, others can kind of jump in as they feel moved. So, Amrita, can you start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Martin. For me, historical context is everything, and so yeah, let's try to do 400 years in 2 minutes, right? But I mean, I think it's important for us to understand that it's not as if we've been struggling for 10 years or 50 years. This has been going on for centuries. And we know that there were rebellions on board transatlantic ships that Black men and women, African men and women were rebelling in the castles and in the forts, actually, before they were even transported onto those transatlantic ships. We know that if you were to drain the oceans, that the ocean floors are littered with the bones of the ancestors, because so many of them, that's where they reside, because they were thrown overboard because they resisted, they committed suicide, they rebelled, and that's where their remains are. And they never made it to the shores of this so-called New World. We know that in the North, we forget about the North when we talk about slavery. We know that in places like New York, there were constant fires set by enslaved people. Arson was a huge problem in cities like New York and Boston because enslaved people were constantly trying to get free. That's why there were curfew laws in cities like New York, because they feared Black people being out on the streets after dark. We know that in the South, that's where the slave patrol rose up, because they didn't want Black people out after dark, because Black people out after dark was dangerous, because they considered Black people being out after dark that we were going to be committing treason, that we were conspiring to rebel, that we were always going to be up to no good. Not only were we other people's property, we were a threat to white people's property, right? We know that stop and frisk comes right out of the slave patrol. So we know that, and it was also not just massive rebellions like the Denmark Vesey Rebellion, the Nat Turner Rebellion, the Gabriel Prosser Rebellion, which many of us, the rebellion at Point Coupé in Louisiana. It was also a daily acts of resistance, right? Women and men every single day who resisted by breaking tools, by refusing to work or work slowly, by women who refused to get pregnant, right, by aborting their babies, by taking abortifacients, by performing forced miscarriages, by doing all kinds of things, by resisting so they could live to resist another day, right? Those daily acts of resistance were constantly happening, right? And then when freedom came, resistance didn't stop, right? People, I mean, absolutely not, because the struggle had to continue, because we had to continue to fight for people to have to acquire the right to vote. And women's voices often get left out of that struggle because Black men acquire the right to vote. Black women continue to have to struggle to acquire that right. And then this is the 100th anniversary of women acquiring the right to vote. Well, white women acquired that right to vote. Black women certainly did not because of Jim Crow and segregation, but women like Ida B. Wells and others were at the forefront of that struggle and get left out of the narrative, right? We hear about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, but we don't hear about Ida B. Wells and how she was pushed out of suffrage parades and told to please step out because white women in the South won't join us in the suffrage movement if you are in the parade. And Ida B. Wells says, I'm still going to be there. And then you come to the civil rights movement and we hear about Dr. King and we hear about Malcolm X, but we often don't hear the fuller story of Ella Baker and Septima Clark, and not even the whole story of Rosa Parks. Black people, men and women of all backgrounds and classes have been resisting from the slave forts to the civil rights movement and today. It's BLM didn't just come out of nowhere. We are a people that have been resisting for over 400 years. So, I mean, if I can, I hope I have not gone over my 2 minutes that I was given, but if I could just, I'm a historian, if I could just contextualize it, the struggle has been long and ongoing, and it is far from over. And I hope that we can dialogue more about this in the next, 7 or 8 minutes that we have together.
Yeah. So thank you for, again, compressing all of this into such a brief period. And so what I'd like to have us do now is take a few moments to talk about some of the things that Amrita brought up. She talked about everything from the breadth of types of resistance, everything from outright armed rebellion to work slowdowns to suicide, all these being different modes of rebellion that were available. That it happened in the North and the South in different ways, whether it was arson or any other number of modes of rebellion that were happening. We think of the big ticket kind of rebellions, but there's all these kind of daily rebellions as well. So how does this help us understand what we're doing, what's going on today around the country? Does anyone else have anything they want to a comment that to any of those points?
Hey, one of the things that struck me clearly about what Amrita was talking about there is that multitude of approaches, the ability to adapt, the ability that Black folks have to adapt and create a wide base of how we approach different struggles and different ways to fight. And to bring that into how we do things today, that there is a multiplicity of approaches that we do, everything from voting and using our voting block to really control things. If it weren't for Black voters ensuring that certain people don't get elected in many sections all over the country, we would be in a lot worse trouble than we are now. Our voting block is one of the strongest voting blocks in this country in terms of how powerful and how united we vote together. But not just stopping at the multiplicity of approaches, but that all of these approaches are valid. That we look through a bunch of different lenses. That Black folk are not just a monolith of one idea, but that we all have different experiences and live different lives, and therefore we can go through things differently and approach things differently. One of the things that I'm constantly reminded of is the struggle of the 60s being transposed and trying to put onto the struggle of today. And there's a disconnect in that what the folks were going through in the 60s versus what we are approaching today, while it is a similar fight and the same fight, sometimes the approaches that worked in the 60s won't work today or haven't been working today. And that's where we sometimes get into this conversation amongst ourselves about how best to approach something. Whether we are the good example of good Black people, or whether we are just true to ourselves and therefore respected and listened to because all of us have merit.
Yeah, this discussion of the the necessity of diversity of tactics certainly is going to be something we come back to as well, and is part of any, I think, sustained struggle, is that it has to adapt over time. Amrita, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna completely agree and say that, well, one, um, I completely agree that participating in the political process is really important. But as I said yesterday, voting, you just can't be a one-trick pony. Like, that's not voting is important, but if that's the only thing you do, shame on you, because that can't be everything, because that's only one thing. And I mean, this is a many-headed hydra that we're dealing with in terms of white supremacy and the way it has insinuated itself into the very fiber and sinew of the nation. And it has to be addressed and attacked on multiple fronts using multiple tactics and strategies. The other thing is that, like the Constitution is supposed to be an evolving document, right? We have to change with the times. And therefore, things that worked 400 years ago, 300 years ago, or even 50 years ago don't necessarily work today, right? And so we have to look at the society that we live in now. And we have to be, like, in terms of technological changes, the shifting demographics of the nation, and we have to plan and move and shift accordingly. So.
Well, one of the things that I think is, goes along with any discussion of a multiplicity of tactics, whether it's within a kind of given historical moment or over the broad term. And that's something we again, both Amrita and Jada brought up, is, how do we even think about the movement, the moments that came before, in the context of what's happening now? How does that sometimes um, uh, um, take over the present moment, make it more difficult for us to work? If anything, what we want to do is use the force of what came before to help propel us forward, not let it hold us back. And one of the conversations that very often leads to that very often needs to undercut contemporary movements has to do with the notion of civility in protest. Uh, and we can all think of 100 examples that we've just seen in the last week, I'm sure, about what the right kind of protest is, what a proper protest is, what a civil protest is, as opposed to whatever other term people want to use. And so, do we want to? Can we talk about this notion of civility in protest just for a moment? I think Jada had, yeah, see Jada's hand. So Jada wants to kick us off with that, and then if others want to jump in, we'd love to hear from everyone on these.
this is Martin. This is my I don't know if I would say favorite topic, but perhaps my pet project topic, where so much of the work that we do in Black Lives Matter has been thwarted in this community, in the Bloomington community, by the insistence upon civility and the insistence upon tone policing and the concept of peaceful protesting and that cudgel, to use like a weapon to say, we're not listening to you unless you speak to us nicely. And now that comes from that a community that is predominantly white and considers itself liberal or progressive or Democrats or whatever. And so we're constantly hearing this, like, you must tone police or you're too aggressive. I mean, how many Black folk watching now or in their core council have heard someone tell you that you are too aggressive when you are speaking your truth, when you are standing up for yourself and when you are fighting for your rights? I think of it is I gave a talk not too long ago about confronting white supremacy, and for me, in Bloomington, we don't face some of the same problems that happen in some other cities, but the thing that is common in all of that is this insistence on civility. And I likened it to the difference between Voldemort and Umbridge, right? Dolores Umbridge and Harry Potter, and say, Voldemort's a problem. Neo-Nazis are a problem. The police shooting and killing Black people is a problem. When we know that, we can see that is identifiable. But what is not identifiable is how the Dolores Umbridges of the world work themselves into every element of institutions and continually police and monitor Black people and their thoughts and their actions. And so we can never fully get through and break through this barrier. And it factors into the nonviolent protests, concept versus police violence, the insistence that Black people quietly and respectfully ask people not to kill them. And even when we do that, much like Colin Kaepernick, even when we just take a knee, that is met with extreme anger and hatred by those who are being asked not to put their knee on our necks. And it's such, and then we never talk about the knee on the neck, and we never talk about that violence, and we never talk about the microaggressions and the little deaths, the deaths by 1,000 cuts that happen to Black folks on a daily basis. We never even get to talk about that because everybody is too busy telling us, be more civil.
That's, excuse me. Well, and I imagine many people have seen Jada talk about this problem specifically in Bloomington before. She has an hour-long presentation on this that is excellent and incredible. 2 hours, she says. It did go, but it was great. It's great, and so thanks for taking us back through the importance of the importance of making sure that you are not impeding a movement that you think you are in support of by doing, again, these small things like tone policing, not being, as Jada says so eloquently, the Dolores Umbridge, even if you're not the Voldemort. And so does anyone else have anything they want to say about this topic of civility and how we're, again, these modes of policing can also impede a movement? Jacinda.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to add that, and I think this isn't obvious to a lot of people, but it should be, that the history of any movement is that the civil side existed only because the uncivil side existed. as kind of a threat, right? So even, we talked about we don't want to compare ourselves to the 60s, but the truth is nothing really happened until people felt threatened by the Black Power movement when Stokely Carmichael came on the scene, and especially after the Watts riots, that's the only point at which things really began to move and shift and change. So when people say, oh, let's talk about what's effective, let's be civil because that's what's effective, that's just not even historically true. This is my pet topic. I could go on and on and on about FBI documents and what really scared people, but it was not the civil side of the movement ever.
Yeah, this is. Oh, did I see another hand? Renee, did you have something you wanted to say on this?
That's Lauren.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lauren. Did you want to jump in? I think you're muted, Lauren.
Yeah, I think a lot of this conversation can be surrounded around how we go into workplaces also. So professionalism is also a space in which you're supposed to be polite and to be respectful in the way that you're demanding equal pay, the way that you're demanding equal time off, and how we work is how we live. And so it's easy to say to ourselves, well, that's just how you are professional. That's how you protest. Here are the right ways. And I think what I'm hearing from Arita is that all ways in which you're resisting have value. And to think that more people can't be less Betsy DeVos and more Ben and Jerry's is not fair, because they do that. They make really clear what they believe and are able to live with the consequences. That is how to use privilege, to not fall into line, to not be polite and respectful of oppressive authoritarian regimes, to in fact step out of line and to be explicit in the way that we support Black people.
Yeah, that's a good, another really good comment, that there's privilege involved with civility, and that's another thing we need to always bear in mind. There are more hands on this for sure, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about some of the other topics, because I think that this is a topic that kind of, again, all of us have a lot to say on. So we'll stretch this one just a little bit. So Amrita, you have another comment on this?
Yeah, just a really brief one, which is that what really is very, to me, insulting and frustrating is when white people weaponize Martin Luther King and use that in this entire debate about protest and peace and civility, and keep inappropriately using King's quotes. And I'm like, you need to keep Dr. King's words out of your mouth, okay? And let me just tell you that y'all don't talk about him except for MLK Day. You don't know nothing about him and his full history. You certainly don't talk about King after a certain point in his evolutionary process. I'm a historian, so let me just say this real clear. But let me just also talk about protest in general, okay? Because I've been working on a piece, and let me just be really, really clear, because it doesn't matter how we've protested, we've been told our actions were wrong. Because as far as white America is concerned, there is no right way that Black people or their allies can protest racism. It don't matter if you pray or cry, sit in or march, sing or say Black Lives Matter, block traffic or take a knee. At the end of the day, Black folks are just supposed to shut up and die. Let's just be real clear. The spectrum, we've tried the spectrum, and it really don't matter. It don't matter how we protest. White people don't like it. And yet,
Yeah.
Dylan Roof gets a burger on his way to prison after he shoots 9 people at prayer in Mother Bethel Church in Charleston. So let's just put this into perspective about how we protest versus how white folks get treated in America.
Yeah, and so we're coming back to this point that, again, we have tried all of the different modes, and that the current protests, again, all the current protests, whatever form they're taking, need to be understood within that broader context. There's nothing we haven't tried yet. and all of these protests are done for the most part with knowledge of that past. We're not doing this in the absence of knowledge. We know what we're talking about. And Jada had one more comment on this on this topic. Jada.
Well, it kind of relates to, you know, our next topic too, but it brings up the question of what people are really asking when they want to know if we are being civil or peaceful. Because, you know, much like has already been talked about the fear of slave revolts, about the fear of Black people joining together and the power in which that actually has, is that liberation, that anti-racist action will at some point in time spill over into violence. And so the question is about whether we are using our Black bodies as a tool of violence against white people. And that's what the fear is based in. And it's not that that's why there's this continued insistency on us being civil, because it is the absolute fear of a Black planet and a fear of us being in our bodies, in control of our bodies, and expressing our outrage onto white bodies. And the reality is that is white people's history and their legacy, and not ours. It is not ours. We did not create that. In the words of the young woman who spoke so eloquently and her video went viral, we learned violence from you. And the reality is that we have never met their violence with the same level of violence. It has never happened in the history of the world. Black people have never reacted to slavery and violent beatings and rape and forced marriages and all of the crazy stuff that has happened to us over the history of the world. We have never met them with that same sort of violence. And in fact, so many of us have met them with I will embrace my abuser and forgive them. And I personally am not somebody who's going to hug my brother's murderer. I'm going to tell you that right now. That's not me. But I do understand the impulse, because it is about trying to move on, trying to get them to see that we are human and we are trying to move on. That is not my approach, nor do I necessarily recommend that that's how anybody approach someone who abuses them that thoroughly. But it is so interesting that it's always the question, especially on Black Lives Matter individuals, like, you guys want to be violent. You're with those violent Antifa people. You want to come in and kill everybody and take everybody's stuff and tear down our precious monuments of Confederate glory and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that we are simply and even quietly, in my opinion, quietly asking for liberation from the oppressiveness of white culture and white supremacy. And that's not, it isn't inherently violent. The violence that happens is perpetrated by the others involved, is the person who's doing the oppressing, is the individuals, is the system that is doing the oppression. That's where the violence is.
So, do we want to have then a longer conversation about the violence inherent in state oppression of black liberation? Does anyone have anything they want to? Because I mean, again, specifically because of the moment where we're in right now, this has all been kicked off. Again, as we've been saying, not out of nowhere, but the most proximal cause that most people can point to is, in fact, state-sponsored lynching of Black people. A number of them in relatively short order. Um, does anyone have any comments kind of specifically on that, on the role of police and policing in the violent repression of Black liberation? I thought I saw a hand. Oh, Jacinda. Jacinda's got it.
No, I was saying Jada. Jada.
Oh. Jada, do you want to jump back in?
I can. It's sort of the topic that I had to go on for the next thing, but I'm sure it'll bring up stuff that other people want to comment on. So going back to the civility element of that is that then when we pull in the police into this conversation, police are the enforcers of white supremacy civility. And so like Amarita so gratefully talked about earlier about the slave patrols coming out of policing coming out of the slave patrols and things like that are white liberal and white supremacy societies adherence to the rigidity of law and order, of police informed law and order, and philosophy and methodology connects deeply to white supremacy. They're the key element in maintaining white supremacy. White liberalism and white supremacy feed into the power of the police by an over-reliance upon them to solve every problem of civility, including these Black people are in this park having a barbecue. I don't think they should be there, so I'm going to call the police. Using the police as customer service of trying to solve all of those problems. And then when the police do enter those situations, because of the nature of police, they overreact, and the nature of white supremacy causes these other things to happen where you get police in close proximity with Black people and a murder happens. But it's that they're the final step in maintaining civility amongst Black folks. And I think Renee perhaps had something to say. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Lauren?
Yeah, reiterating that in the way that we relate recent events with the county council about deciding whether or not to unfreeze a hiring freeze to hire another deputy during COVID exemplifies how there is a constant drive to continue using the police, the sheriff department, to make sure civility for white supremacy is involved. Because civility, you already imagine some white guy in a waistcoat or something. I don't know why. I don't know why we think that those two things go together. Well, here's why. The cops tell white people, this is the world in which we could live in if Black and brown people would just calm down. If they would just sit down, if they would just follow the rules, everything would be civil. And so for our community to show up and say to the county council, you have another option. You don't have to continue this practice during a hiring freeze, for me was a moment of acknowledging the privilege that he would even ask during a hiring freeze to hire someone moments before we're having any kind of action in the street. It's an incredible amount of timing and tells you clearly that they were not thinking at all, considering at all how the community will react, and we're only obligated to tell us. That's a failure.
Yeah, and the fact that call to unfreeze the hiring freeze, as you said, it came right around the same time that there was a very large protest against police violence planned in Bloomington. If it seems like it might have been a reaction, but certainly was poor. It certainly looks bad, and they either didn't notice or didn't care. which again, as Lauren just said, is kind of, if anything else, just looks incompetent. It looks like um, uh, it looks like a city government that is not well suited to deal with these issues at the very least. I mean, another connection that Lauren brought up is that this is happening, as we said kind of at the beginning, in the context of a pandemic. And a lot of people commented about Minneapolis. It's wild that you couldn't get funding to help curtail the medical health impact of this pandemic, but suddenly there's nothing but money to outfit the police with all sorts of military gear, hire police from neighboring municipalities, from neighboring states, pay the National Guard to come in and put down black, well, activists who are protesting the murder, the lynching of a black person. And so I think that's another thing that we might want to wrap in here, is that this is all happening in the context of a public health crisis that is also disproportionately affecting Black people. We've got everything from, again, the underlying health disparities that even not in a pandemic situation, Black folks have worse health outcomes in almost every circumstance. But in addition, this COVID-19 in particular seems to have higher mortality rates for Black people than for others. So, and we could get into this in a number of different ways. One way would be to think, if nothing else, just about public funding. The fact that we're sending all this money to police that could be sent to take care of folks. We could think about it in terms of the broader context of Black health, how white supremacy is itself, on some level, a public health crisis. So does anyone want to help us think through this connection between state-sponsored violence and pandemic, or even put them together, that that they are part of maybe even a broader pandemic? Jacinda, did you have something?
Yeah, sure. I want to say, just to piggyback on what you're saying, one thing that we've seen also, that is connected to the pandemic, is that we've seen our economy just completely crash. We have levels of unemployment that I think are beyond the Great Depression at this point. And let's be real. I mean, thank you, Minneapolis, because this week has been sort of like Christmas for those of us who want police reform, for those of us who want criminal justice reform, right? And it is only because, what did we see? We saw the destruction of property. What are the police there to protect? Property. And I always say, you can, if you're Black, you can be mad at the police as a someone who they hunt down, but you can also be mad at them as a crime victim, because they're not there to serve, respect, and protect everyone. They're there to serve, respect those who are at the top of the capitalist system. So I think it's very much connected. I mean, I would love for us, as we go forward, this week has seen so much sort of re-envisioning of what we can do. We have the Minneapolis City Council is thinking of, what is abolition? What does abolition mean? I think one thing abolition does mean is that we do take those resources and we put them into the world in a way where we don't need the police, because we're not sucking from the bottom of a capitalist system that is there to not only oppress people of color, but turn us into the bottom of that ladder and turn us into new modern day slaves, right? So I look forward to continuing this abolition conversation.
Yeah. Amrita, do you have something you wanted to you wanted to add to?
Oh.
I think you're muted, just Amrita.
Okay. Yeah, I can't figure this out half the time. Yeah, I was just thinking about all of the, as we're talking about defunding the police and the connections as well to decarceration, and the links between these things. Los Angeles, of course, the mayor just announced the other day that they're going to defund, they're going to take $150 million right away from the police. And they're going to divert that $150 million from the budget to things like community policing efforts, mental health, social services, et cetera. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's a step in the right direction, right? And all of a sudden, things that were impossible 3 months ago or 6 months ago are amazingly possible now. These things have always been possible. They're eminently possible. They've always been possible. And I mean, it's when we're talking about defunding the police, we are talking about taking things out of the budget from certain places and then putting them into social services, mental health, funding drug treatment facilities, mediation. We're talking about legalizing marijuana. We're talking about legalizing sex workers so that you decrease the need for the police force and increase other things. We're also talking about getting people out of jail who are sitting there for marijuana crimes and sex work. We're talking about legalize, it reduces the prison population, right? For people who are there for nonviolent offenses or things that are not even offenses as far as I'm concerned, right? You're decarcerating, you're putting people back into the workforce, right? You're also making things safer for sex workers. You're giving them health insurance, right? You're protecting them, and you're also, making our neighborhoods safer, right? Instead of criminalizing drug addicts, you're giving them, or people who have addictions, you're giving them treatment, right? You're doing all kinds of things, right? If cops say they don't want to be social workers, don't make them social workers. You're also not putting them, you're not criminalizing homelessness, right? Because police officers are being sent into communities and put against the homeless. You are reducing police forces, and you're taking that money and putting it where it is going to best serve our communities by helping people. And that's exactly what we mean by defunding the police. You're taking money away and putting it towards the community where it will do the most good. But it's a two-part system, because by decriminalizing certain drugs, by decriminalizing sex work, by getting people, we have so many people sitting in jail who can't even get out because of bail policies, right? By reforming the bail system, by doing all of these things, you are decarcerating and you are defunding the police. It's a two-pronged system because our justice system is unjust, and it attacks Black people. It attacks Black and brown people because it is our people that is the majority of the prison population. And we are the most highly incarcerated country in the world, number one, period. Be higher than China, higher than Russia combined, per capita and whole numbers. So if we address this head on, if we defund the police, we also decarcerate simultaneously, and we take all that money and we put it into the community, and we put it towards social work, mental health, tracking drug addiction, all of these things. The money's always been there. Nobody's ever wanted to address it because they don't care about our communities. And all of a sudden now it's like, we can find the money. Of course you can find the money. So.
Yeah, the downside of doing this event over Zoom is that no one other than us can see each other reacting to what's happening here, because we've got to keep everyone muted when they're not talking. Otherwise, you all know from Zoom, it just gets, but that's not, at that point, I don't know. If you've ever been to a Black event, people have things to say.
Amen.
And exactly. And we've been saying it. You just can't hear it. So, yes. So this is great. And what this brings us to, I think, is starting to think about, okay, the money has always been there. Okay, it's just the will hasn't been. but maybe we've got a minute where the will is there just for a second, right? Just for a second. It's a popular thing. This is something that, of course, you've probably seen going around. All of us have, and hopefully many of you watching have as well. That, yeah, it's cool to care about this stuff right now, but this is sustained. As we've been saying, this is part of a 400-year struggle, right? 400 or 500-year struggle. So we can't just be excited about it right now and forget about it next month. This has to be ongoing. So what are some, so I think Lauren actually had some things, some ideas about what it looks like to go forward. What are some of the things that we need in order to to build a better world, right? We're starting, folks are starting to get in tune with the things that don't work. Policing, the way we've been doing it, doesn't work. Underfunding health for Black, brown, people of color, indigenous folks, poor folks, doesn't work. It leads to a pandemic. So what we want to do now is maybe talk through quickly a couple of ideas about what we need to go forward. Just before we do that, though, I want to mention that if you have any questions that you want to throw into the Facebook Live comments, that would be great. We'll have about 20 minutes or so to address them pretty shortly here. So we'll try to talk about as many as we can, which won't be nearly as many as we get. Yeah, throw those into the Facebook Live chat, and we'll see what we can do. But yeah, I know that Lauren had some things to say again about building a better future.
Yeah, I think what Amrita said is the money's already been there. Guess what? So has the land. The land has always been here. It didn't go anywhere. It's been here the whole time. It's who's been occupying the land is the question. So when we think about moving forward, first of all, stop shopping at the city market. There's a Nazi there. Second off, you can genuinely consider how to support Black and brown vendors, prioritizing them. So we get a lot of conversation about how we need to reimagine. Black women are reimagining in this world every moment of every day because we aren't welcome in it. So we've been I'm daydreaming constantly about how this community can better serve itself by prioritizing the Black and brown people in it. So when we consider how to move forward, where I intersect most passionately is about farming. It's about land reparation. There's all kinds of national organizations that talk about doing it individually. We're talking about creating a national network of land that will be turned over willingly as a healing practice. So we've got hundreds of thousands of acres that were stolen over this period of time. We've got 99% of them being inherited. There are groups who are coming to folks and saying, instead of passing it down to your family, why not give willingly and freely to the support, prioritization, and feeding Black families by giving us our land? Give it back. It was never yours to take, and now you have a debt to the people who gave you food and continue to do so. And how can we as Indianans do something about that? There are programs that will allow Indigenous folks to come in and do ceremony on land that white people have stolen. There are programs that My Farm in and of itself will start where we're asking white landowners to give us space to grow food for free. That's the plan. So when we consider how land reparation, money reparation, body reparation, right? Because that's where the health comes in. To me, COVID and white supremacy are one and the same. Nobody believes it's real, and it's killing me. So part of it is that we have to accurately address how to heal the body, the land, the minds of Black people from white supremacy. How do we continue to protect those bodies, to continue to protect the land that some of us individually are trying to acquire, and to leave recently I was in the garden, I said to myself, I'm trying to leave Jasper all the topsoil possible. Not a parking lot, not buckets in my apartment, tillable, arable land for the next generation. And that's what I think we all could do together.
Yeah, that is, I don't know. Yes. Yes, that is part of that is a huge part of the path forward. And one of the great things that Lauren brought up is the notion that having dispossessed Black folks and Indigenous folks of their land is, in a sense, also dispossessing them of their bodies, of their health. We had a comment from our friend Abagunde, who talks, who's saying that you know the history of the struggle kind of leaves its mark on, as they say, each DNA strand of Black folks. That this is part of the heritage as well, and this goes to Lauren's point that, right, it's impossible to dissociate those things like COVID from white supremacy more broadly. We have, let's see if we have any other questions coming in. It's great to see people engaged. We've got a lot of comments, but fewer questions, which is fine. The questions are there as a service if folks had things they wanted us to discuss. So I thank everyone for watching and engaging. Jada has something she wants to throw in right here.
Well, I want to like let us fully listen and think about some of the things that just happened. Okay. Lauren just said, much like COVID, white supremacy is something that people don't believe exists, but is killing me. And when Amarita was talking, she was talking about using those funds that usually go to war machines and the oppression of Black people and putting them into the community. So often in this conversation, when we talk about defunding the police or abolishing the police or abolishing the prison systems, abolishing those structural things that people think are that, and I'm going to be real honest with you, Black people and white people, okay, I'm saying that, think are so integral to our society that they don't think about that there are other options of how to do things, that we've created one option. It doesn't work for everybody. And in fact, it is specifically designed to hurt a particular group of people and possibly several groups of people, right? But we have created this one model. It does not work. So now that it's not working, how do we tear it apart and put in place things that do work? And Lauren is giving you a good example. Amarita and Jacinda gave you good examples. The other examples that I'm going to talk about a little bit is about Afrofuturism and thinking about what it is to create a society not based on white supremacy. That we're taking a society and we're changing it to talk about taking the knowledge that Black folks have and putting it into the future as future plans for the world. And that goes for every element of our society, taking capitalism and not replacing it with Black capitalism, but creating a new form of ways to exchange goods and services to each other without killing other people in the process, without incarcerating other people in the process. And so in the multiverse, in a world of infinite possibilities, the fact that we consistently only come up with yes or no, this one or that one, is an insane way to be, when there are multiple opportunities every day to think of infinite possibilities for how to perform everyday actions. So I just encourage all of us to really pull all of that together and think about an Afro future that isn't so locked in binary thinking. And Black folks are a brilliant way to pull our collective historical and ancestral knowledge together, working with our other brown brothers and sisters and siblings to create a new way of envisioning the world where white supremacy is not the dominant culture.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that really brings us to again where we were trying to get today was, um, again, where did the current state of affairs come from? It's, situated within a much broader context. Um, what is the state of it now? And what can we look for going forward? Uh, Given that, again, for many of us, returning to normal is not what we want, right? Again, that's a slogan you keep hearing in regards to COVID, but then later also in response to, I've seen it from a lot of, I get probably primarily white folks in Minneapolis saying, when can we just get back to normal? When can these protests be over so we can get back to normal? And right. So one of the things that all of the people who spoke today have put so eloquently is that we're not looking for normal. We're looking for something new. Normal hasn't worked for 400 years. We need something better than what we have been given for the past 4 centuries. The last 4 centuries that have produced the necessity for response anywhere from objection, protest to outright rebellion. Um, we have a few more things we wanted to talk about, and so again, this is the other difficult part about doing this remotely, is that the timing doesn't always work out because we're getting a lot of questions now, and we're kind of getting to the point where we need to wrap up. So I'm going to try to just hit one or two of these. Some of them we're going to hit in our closing comments. We're going to be ending. We're going to be ending with some resources that we'd like you to consider. So we have questions like, hey, where can we send, should we send money somewhere? Can we do things like that? And we'll hit you with some of that at the end. But some questions have to do with sort of practical concerns over how we can best respond to what are we looking at here? How best to respond to much more situated and mundane problems in the political realm. So things like, for example, a lynching bill that can't be passed because there's some opposition. We could also think more locally. Just for context, in case people weren't aware, the U.S. Senate had put forth, a bill to make lynching illegal. I guess there is not a federal bill. There never has been a federal bill, and it was held up by a few Republicans. But we can also think about more local things. Where local government or local policymakers are getting in the way sometimes of the sorts of changes we might want to see. And so, does anyone have anything they want to say about how best to push? Again, ultimately, we're not looking for policy changes. We're looking to remake the future. But in the, as we're working toward that, sometimes these kind of little political policy changes are the things we need to do. Does anyone have any comment on what they see as ways of responding to regressive political policy, um, on the way to these futures? Anyone wants to jump in? Yeah, Amrita.
Okay, so am I unmuted? Yeah. So one of the things that I was really just so incredibly struck by and moved by during the COVID crisis was how quickly mutual aid groups grew up all over the country, including here in Bloomington, to deal with the crisis. And that's really collectively how Black and Brown folk have been working forever, right? I mean, that's how we've survived. If you look historically at African American history, right, mutual aid societies, I mean, that's how we've gotten by. That's how we've been burying our folks forever, because that's how we had to do it in terms of being able to have funerals and being able to like do everything. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but it was just amazing to me. And I mean, right here in Bloomington, I mean, the People's Community Market is just such a beautiful example of that. And I can't just stress enough how everybody needs to be going to the market. But that brings me to this conversation of what we need to be doing locally. Because, I mean, we've been saying it for over a year, and I'll just say it again, that the city market needs to be done, right? The city needs to divest itself from the market. It needs to be a grower-run cooperative. Anybody who is still purchasing from the city market needs to boycott that market entirely. BLM has long called for an entire boycott of that market. And if you are still purchasing from that market, you are supporting white supremacy, because there are open neo-Nazis vending at that market. You need to be purchasing from the People's Community Market, which is run by women and people of color and Black folk and amazing people. I mean, there are people on this call who have helped to get that market up and off the ground and running, people like Lauren, people like Jada and others. I mean, that is an amazing, I mean, that is exactly one of the things that we need to be doing. Is we've been working to try and get that market, to get the city out of the market and to get that market turned into a growers collective. If you are still supporting that market, you are supporting white supremacy, full stop. And I mean, they can say it's about free speech, they can say whatever they want, but that is white liberal racism in practice on a day-to-day basis. So to me, if we want to talk about, local action, local policy, that's it right there. I mean, I can't say it any more plainly than that. So, I mean, I'm going to turn over. I mean, I know other people have other things as well, but as far as I'm concerned, we could talk about the Bearcat too, because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that was a shady deal. That is an incredible example of militarization of the police. It's $250,000 that is far better spent in our community, that could be turned over to social services to help the homeless in our community, because Bloomington has the largest homeless population in the state of Indiana. So, and we have seen how they have been pushed out of People's Park, how they're terrorized and moved from place to place to place. So what could we do with $250,000 to help with mental health and social services, to help those who don't have secure housing? Because we've seen what happened during COVID and how people in the community, again, came together in terms of mutual aid to help those who didn't have secure housing during a global pandemic. Because how can you self-isolate when you don't have anywhere permanent to reside? So that's what I would say, is that the Bearcat needs to go, and those funds need to be used to help the community. And we need to make sure that the city market goes down.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so we've got we've got some more questions here. We've got a question about, oops, now I've lost it. Again, not the ideal format, but we're getting used to it. So we've got a question about, I'm going to read this because I think it's asked really well. And I'm interested to see what people want to say about it. The question starts with a comment. There is no normal. After trauma, if one attempts to return to normal, there will only be more traumas. This is why 400 plus years, this country cannot move forward. They're always seeking a return to the civil, in quotes, the past, the comfortable. This does not exist. We also have to address trauma at this time and healing. How will BLM B-town address some of this? How can the healers who are interested in this work assist as a community and help us move forward? I mean, this is a huge question, but also one that I really like. So, does anyone want to talk a little bit about, what does heal, if there's no return to normal, what does healing look like? Oops, Jada.
Well, I was also, I'm monitoring the chat too, so I saw that question, and my immediate response is to think about some of the programs that we have been doing and that we're continuing to do. And I'm gonna hop back on the concept of the People's Market and working in conjunction with the People's Market, not only because I'm on the board for the People's Market, the planning committee for the People's Market, but also because food and food security is and access to food is one of the easiest but meaningfulest ways to add that level of healing. Food is just, literally healing. And we have just started a new partnership, and we're going to mention it again later, but a new partnership with the People's Market to take some of the funds that have been generously donated to us. And I want to pause for a second and give a special shout out to Hopscotch Coffee, because they have been matching donations. They've been putting up a digital tip jar, but they've also been matching donations. And today they just sent $1,800 to us as a match donation. And I just want to praise them for that and thank them for that. But we're taking some of that money and on a weekly basis purchasing from the People's Market and bringing that food directly to the Black community. And we are also sponsoring boxes, and that's a key part of working with the People's Market, is that they have a sponsored boxes program where you can purchase sponsored boxes, and then we donate those sponsored boxes to those who are in need, and they can request them from us. We have a hard time always meeting those requests because we're not getting enough donations in. So BLM is partnering with them to help ensure that we can raise the level of donations that we have to give out, and also ensure that Black and Brown people are having access to that food as a priority. And that's a new partnership. We haven't fully fleshed it out. We're not really fully up and running with it yet, but that to me is that trying to address some of that healing and taking part in that. And I know that many of us are thinking about healing. Maybe we're thinking about healing in other spiritual ways too. But a lot of what we do is really try to address some of the needs that are not being met in our community. And we've been doing, donation drives and things like that, but we've also been doing the hard work of some of the political aspects of talking to our council members, city council and county council members, of getting to the heart of the matter and supporting people who are being marginalized by the system at large. I've seen in our chat that Brandon Drake has joined us, and I just want to give a special shout out to Brandon, and give him some love and support, and let other people know that if they are experiencing problems in their workplaces, and they're Black and brown people that are experiencing problems in their workplaces, we can also be a resource to help you achieve the justice that you need.
So one question that came up a few times had to do with, and so my had to do with workplace dynamics. In a place like Bloomington, in particular, it seems like it would be pretty easy for responses to it seems like sorry, trying to read the chat at the same time I'm talking. I'll stop doing that. In a place like Bloomington, it seems like it would be pretty easy for attempts at structural change to turn into something more like tokenism. And so I think this speaks on some level to the necessity of ongoing transformation. And in fact, Brandon brought this up in a question as well. How do we make sure that the sorts of transformation that people are doing in the Bloomington community is kind of more holistic? It isn't, tokenistic hiring. It isn't jumping on board with a with a movement when it's popular, then forgetting about it next month when the next thing comes along. What advice do we have for people looking for more substantive change?
I can speak to that really quickly.
Great, thanks, Lauren.
I attend the Indiana Black Expo conference every year. It's also hosted by IU Education. They spend the entire day talking about ways in which we in the classroom, we in the community, and we as leaders can continue to train ourselves, retrain ourselves, and reimagine how we're showing up. That's one resource. I think for what I'm passionate about in terms of land and reparations and healing in that space, it's important that we realize you can't solve everything on your own. And so taking direction and leadership from the Black and brown people around you as a non-person of color is one way. But if you are in a scenario in which your professionalism is questioned, where you cannot actually move up or forward, that is a conversation that's much larger than your boss getting trained. It's about the systems that they're not allowed to move through to help you elevate. And so I think it's important that we understand that the system can meet the individual. And so we need to see that the healing isn't just one by one, it's also a structural re-examination of what healing can look like. Prioritizing students on campus, prioritizing employees is one way, but how are you prioritizing and healing in the work that matters to you? So when we consider how the resources that we'll give you is one way, another resources is about tokenism by Janelle Glass, but really the work is both. It's doing individual work and then met with this, when you meet systemic work, knowing who and what networks to direct your energy to make larger change.
And can I add to that? So I think like one thing that we've all been talking about a lot this week is that, yes, there are these alleged good apples somewhere, but the fact that the good apples aren't affecting the system on the whole means that the system itself is a whole rotten barrel. We are, in a way, we're all cops because the system as a whole is rotten. And so, wherever you are, you need to realize that. If you're at work, you need to realize that, and you need to step in and be one of those good apples, right? Who actually says, okay, how am I going to change this system? How am I going to change this whole barrel? If you teach in a school, you need to realize that that system is also rotten. Anywhere you are, you need to think about affecting systemic change, because it's not just individual, right? And it's not about learning something this week and keeping it to yourself. It's about impacting a whole system.
Yeah, great. I so let's see. I'm trying to scan through and see if we have. I'm looking at our program. We don't want to. We said this was going to be an hour and a half, and we're at that. But we started a little bit late, and if folks, if the rest of the panelists can stick around, it looks like, yeah, I see some nodding heads. All right, so I think we'll keep going just a little bit here. Um, um, try to answer a few more questions, and at the end, like I said, we have some more kind of action items for you all out there who are interested again in doing something, um, but maybe don't know precisely what your next step should be. Um, so let me see what I can find here. Um, oops.
Martin, while you're looking for a question, I'm going to answer just something I'm seeing right now
Okay.
about donation stuff.
Right,
People are
that's what I was looking for.
sorry. People are asking us about donations, and we have a Venmo account that you can donate to us directly. That is what we're using right now, just to try to keep things as simple as possible. But Hopscotch, like I said, they have a donation function on their digital tip jar that they have. I know that the Owlery is also saying that if you can donate, and they will help get that donations to us. There was a question specifically about whether it would be easier to donate to Black Lives Matter or to donate or to buy sponsored boxes from the People's Market. Well, depending on what you want to do. If you want to focus your funds on food justice, going to People's Market might be a quick, just a very direct way to do food justice with People's Market. If you're donating to us, know that your donation is going into several different things. Like, we are not just our programs, but we're also donating to other people to do bailouts right now during the protests and to help other institutions. And so we're your money, like, let's say it goes farther. I don't necessarily know that that's like true or whatever, but it's getting broken into a lot of different projects that we're doing. So it just depends on what you want to focus on. Do you want to sponsor food, or do you want to sponsor food and do some other things? My suggestion is, how about do both if you can? And we're not talking about, dropping $200. We're talking about, if you got $5, we'll take it and we'll give it to those who need it.
Awesome. All right. So I think we have probably two more questions that I'm kind of putting together multiple questions into two clusters that seem to be showing up. One is, I think, kind of piggybacks on that last conversation we had about systemic change, and this was a question about more Black voices in art, and things like that. And this is, I know this is an interest for a couple of us in particular, but also it makes me think. I think it was yesterday or the day before, a local artist, Nat Bowden, put out a statement basically calling for no more, concerts, shows in town that are just white dudes. And this is, makes me think of, whenever I see calls like that, I think, how many shows have I been to where it was, 4 bands that were just all white dudes? Many of the shows I really liked. it's a fine configuration, but statistically improbable, if outside of a system of white supremacy. It is statistically improbable that there would ever be a show where all 16 people up on stage are all white men. Vanishingly improbable. And so these kind of calls to actively make sure that we have better representation in things like arts, but also in other venues, I think are important. So I know we have, like I said, a number of artists, creators, in this crew. Do folks have things they want to say about more, getting more Black voices into the arts?
Um, I mean, this is in the literary industry, right? It's not necessarily things don't happen at a local level, but it is very much about gatekeeping, and I think it's like that all across the arts, right? In the visual arts and the literary arts, even in music. And I think it's incumbent on people wherever they are gatekeepers, and often people don't realize what kind of gatekeepers they are, but it's important to understand that we all need to usher in voices, and not only is representation is important, yes, but one of the reasons representation is important is that James Baldwin has this quote, everything has been taken away from Black people, and when you take away their artists, they're going to be furious, right? And it goes to something. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but it goes to something I did want to talk about, which is Black joy, right? So I want to say I'm so happy for you all today, because this is my Black joy is resistance. Like people are like, "Oh, are you down?" I'm like, "No, because everybody's resisting right now. This is my joy." But another joy we have as a community is art. So it's incumbent on not only us, but white people who are gatekeepers to keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. It's not, like you're saying, Martin, it's statistically impossible that there's going to be 16 white guys, but that's not always true, right? So yeah, I think it's just about gatekeeping is all I want to say.
Yeah, right. No, that was absolutely my point too. Is that, yeah, if it weren't for gatekeeping, this would never just happen by chance, right? It's yes. So I absolutely agree. Yeah, and the literary world is one that I have far less interaction with. So that's great to have that perspective as well. Like I said, I spoke a little bit about the music scene because that's the one I know. But yeah, it happens in all of the arts, that you know the suppression of our voices in multiple venues. We could talk about the academic world as well. Amrita, did you have something you want to say?
What I was going to say is that it becomes really egregious academic, literary, music, art, um, where what they'll do then is they'll be like, okay, we'll just have one. And it becomes equally damaging because they'll be like, well, we'll see. It's not just all white guys. And so there'll be just that it's psychologically so damaging, because in every department or every theater group or every band or every symphony orchestra, one. And I'm sorry, but who wants to be Ruby Bridges in 2020? I'm not here for that. And I don't think anybody else is anymore either. So there's a danger to the statement of whoever made that question, because it's really easy for white folks to take that and turn it around and be like, well, because I've seen it done across universities. I've seen it done in so many different venues. And so we have to be very careful about how those things are implemented.
Can I say just one last thing? Jada said early on, we are not a monolith. This is hugely important in gatekeeping, right? And I can think of a number of contexts, but I remember one thing someone said to me when I was shopping my first novel is, well, where is the struggle? And I thought, I'm not sure like what struggle you're wanting to see there, but it may be a different struggle that but I mean, it happens a lot. I think we all see it in music, right? Because the biggest consumers of rap music are not Black people. So what has happened to rap is that it has become much less political. In the 90s, actually, the FBI went to people's, rappers' houses and made them stop being political. And so again, it's like the gatekeeping sort of presumes that we're this monolith, and not only that, but that we are there to be consumed by white people, and that our art doesn't need to represent us all. And so this is something that another thing gatekeepers need to think about. We're a pretty big body of people in our diaspora.
Yes, that's terrific.
Can I just, I'm just gonna add one sentence.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, if we're really invested in this, then you're going to be a lot, you're going to go to music festivals and see all Black bands. You're going to have all Black theater troupes. You're going to go to departments and see multiple Black people in departments, not just one or even two, and it's not just, and they're not going to all be in the Black Studies department. And you're going to actually invest in those Black Studies departments. They're not just going to be programs, they're going to be departments. Okay, it's going to be a multiple dollar investment across the board in a lot of different ways.
And this gets to exactly the point that Jacinda and Jada were making, that that it has to be that way because we are not Black. There is not one Black opinion about things, and the kind of tokenizing makes it seem as though there might be, that we've got the Black guy, so we're all good here. No, again, as Jada's words were, we are not a monolith. Yeah, and so I think this gets us to our the last question I think we want to address, because we can't go all night. This last question is about collaborating. Collaboration either with BLM or collaborating, BLM with other groups. And so this question, I think, actually, most of this, for practical reasons, has been kind of speaking to a presumptively, on some level, presumptively white audience. It's Bloomington. It's a very white city, but I think in this question, maybe we'll be talking a little more directly to Black folks who are saying, hey, what can we do in terms of either working with BLM, becoming active ourselves, and things like that. So I guess the way we might frame this is, a lot of us are veteran organizers. Most of us don't want to be. Most of us would rather be doing something else with their time. But we are, by the circumstance of the world that refuses to let us do what we need to do, veteran organizers. And so how can folks, either young folks or folks new to the scene, learn from what we're trying, what we've done? What can we tell them in terms of either doing their own stuff or working with us, or anything along those lines?
Let me hit that. We have been actively trying for a while to pull together coalitions of people to work together, and that means working together. That means we create things together. That means we sit down and go through the process of working together. We care very deeply about working agreements, and how when we work and partner with other organizations, how that is going to work actually, and what we are expected from each other. BLM can always use people to come and help us do the projects we're doing, but we always also are looking for more people to partner with us further our mission of Black Lives Matter, and not just that we mattered, but we want Black lives to thrive too. And so, you know, we may do another call out. We haven't really discussed talking about having a call out. It's pretty difficult right now trying to really keep COVID in mind, to try to have group meetings and things like that. So we have to kind of parcel that out in the next month or so, of how we're going to do those sorts of things. But it should be said that we as a group, as the 7 individuals that we are, we're pretty concerned about, you know, who we work with, and whether our tactics can align and benefit each other, but also how we do those partnerships. And that, is it a fair partnership? Are we all being honest with each other? Are we being upfront with each other? Are we communicating with each other? Are we making sure that everything is above board? And that is the trick in how to work with any organizations. And we've had problems. I'm going to be real honest. We've had problems with specific white groups in town in the past who would like to dictate how we work. And again, bringing in that civility concept into that. And that actually gets into, you know, severe problems. It gets into severe problems with being able to work with Black groups. And so it means that I know that a lot of white people have been for, you know, a few weeks now, or a week or so now, have been messaging us of how can I help? How can I help? How can I help? And, you know, we've been advocating for people to do things like, if you are able-bodied and physically able to go where you are needed, that is a model that we ask. You know, Black Lives Matter in Indianapolis has been repeatedly asking for bodies to come, and in fact, right now at 3, they had a sit-in at the Circle building, whatever it's called. I can't think of it. Monument Square or Circle or whatever. But they have asked for bodies. Other BLM organizations in other parts of the country have asked for people who are able-bodied to come help them, and in particular for white people to stand in front of them, to be a block and a protect against the police, to physically put yourself on the line the way that Black people are doing. And I know that may sound scary, and it is scary. And in particular, given COVID, it's scary. But so that's something that we're asking people who are fully ready, you know, like understand what they are getting themselves into. Other things that we're asking for are through donations, and we've dropped some links into our chat here. There's links on our page as to how you can donate to us directly, but there's also national bail funds. There's national bailouts. We work with other organizations all over the country who are doing those sorts of things. So why I'm saying money is that money goes into actually helping people do things that the state is not doing right now. Now, we would like to turn the state into doing those things, but they're not. So let's us get together and help ourselves. Then there's the other element of self-reflection, of how can we address anti-racism if we have not addressed our racism within ourselves, right? So we're asking white people, Black people, brown people to address the racism in the room first and foremost. And so now's, especially because we're still kind of quarantining, everybody's still kind of quarantining, now's a great time to access our resource list that's on our page. We have just updated it with more articles containing, you know, why do we really need the police? Police are attacking journalists. Don't let cops join our protests. Rubber bullets are anything but non-lethal. They should be banned. So these sorts of articles that are about what's happening right now, we've added some of that to our resource list on our website. We've also added some more conversations about how to become an anti-racist. But it's, you know, I always use the analogy of, you know, when you're on an airplane and you're going down and they say, put your air mask on first and then turn to the other person and help them put theirs on. That is because if you can't breathe, and I'm saying that on purpose, if you cannot breathe, then how can you help someone else to breathe? If you cannot fully understand racism, in how it's ingrained in you and how you act in the world, how can you help someone else? And to that end, I'm going to say one more thing. I'll shut up real quick. We have on our website, in our resource list, a download where you can go download Layla Said's workbook. She has a book, but then she has a workbook that's called Me and White Supremacy Workbook. And it is literally a guide for you to go through yourself and and do the work of examining the racism within you. And I wish y'all could see the reactions from my fellow core council members, because I'm loving it. But it's do that work, look in the mirror, talk to yourself in the mirror, and figure out what it is that you need to pull out of yourself so that you can be fully present for everybody else.
Okay, so we need to wrap up now. We're getting close to 5. I think we've said everything that can be said. That's not true at all. This has been really great. I see a lot of engagement still coming in on the Facebook Live, so it looks like you all are into this too. Hopefully, you all have learned some stuff, have gotten some questions answered, and can be better agents toward the Black liberation that this group and so many other groups in town and around the country are working toward. I think we want to head to the end of our program then. We're going to have a short reading by Jada B. No, we're not doing that. We're cutting that. Okay. So, so I guess then we're gonna go to Renee, who's going to quickly, basically give us a summary of some action items that we want people to take in. And now I'm being told maybe we're not doing that either. We are doing that. Okay. Like I said, trying to do an event with 7 people not in the same room comes with some challenges. So yeah, we're gonna have Renee give us some, like I said, some kind of summary action items, as well as talk about some. We're going to talk about some upcoming projects that BLM is working on, and then we will all go and enjoy the rest of our afternoon. So Renee.
Okay, briefly, just on some action items, what can we be doing? Okay, so I've pulled these action items from things that we have said. Dr. Myers spoke yesterday, and she had these action items. One is IUPD is a campus police force and they don't need guns. IUPD must disarm. Number 2, BPD doesn't need an armored assault vehicle. BPD needs to sell the Bearcats. Okay. The city of Bloomington, number 3, the city of Bloomington has shown that it can no longer handle the management of the Bloomington Community Farmers Market. The city needs to divest itself of the farmers market and privatize it so that it can be managed equitably. Okay, now what is Black Lives Matter Bloomington doing right now? Just briefly, we have coming up our Juneteenth event. It will be on Friday, June 19th. Please turn into our Facebook page for information about that. We have used the funds coming in. We have created a micro grant for students and families who are pursuing higher education. There will be 4 grants for our children to help further their education. We are also going to be working on our med kits and med training. I want to go ahead and give Jada the mic just a second to talk about partnering with People's Market for free local food for our Crestmont residents and Black residents. Go ahead, Jada.
Well, I sort of said some of that earlier, but we are partnering with People's Markets to do this free local food for Crestmont's residents and particularly Black residents too. So we want to challenge though everyone who is watching to buy sponsored boxes. Go to the People's Market, divest from the farmers market, the city-run farmers market, and invest in the People's Market and help us do one-to-one donations. So you buy a produce box, sponsor a produce box. You buy a meat box, sponsor a meat box. You buy a loaf of bread, sponsor a loaf of bread. You buy a dozen eggs, sponsor a dozen eggs. That's what Black Lives Matter is doing. So we are asking you to do that as well.
Awesome. And so we also have donated funds to the community members and bail funds in multiple states, most importantly in Wisconsin, Indiana, Indianapolis, Kentucky, Louisville, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then lastly, I can speak about the Dignity Bag Drive that is going on. The Dignity Bag Drive is happening in conjunction with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bloomington. You can find details on our website. Please check the website for most needed donations. And you can drop your donations at the UU Church on the portico side in the marked boxes for them. Those are collected daily. And shout out to the folks who are helping us corral and get those out. Those will be delivered to our homeless population on the 4th of July weekend. So go ahead and donate and give in all the ways that we have listed. We are taking your support and sending it back to our community.
Great. So I want to thank everyone for coming and hanging out with us for a couple of hours. Oops, I'm missing one thing. All right. Yes, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. I'd also like to thank the core council members for participating. Jacinda Townsend, Jada B., Renee Rashid, Lauren McAllister, and Amrita Chakrabarty Myers. If you would like to communicate with us further, hit up our Facebook or our website. You can email us. And I think that's all we need. Oh, Jada, did you have one more thing you wanted to say before we go?
Don't forget to share this link. Once it is posted, we'll have it available for people to view later. So after we are done going live, you'll be able to repost this and share it with other folks who perhaps missed it today, and spread the word. You can make sure you go to our website to check out our resource list. You can see previous videos that Black Lives Matter has done, and all of our upcoming projects will be listed on our Facebook page and our website as well. Thank you.